Well, I'm in a business. I'm in a construction business, and I do properties restoration. And I have a customer who's at Cannon Beach, Oregon, and it's oceanfront. And we all know there's almost so much oceanfront in the world. And this is about a $5 million house. So it's a modest house. It's got a view of Haystack, which is a famous rock formation that everyone comes and visits from all over the world. And I'm talking to the homeowner, who's a very wealthy developer from the Denver area. And I said, well, who's your neighbor here? And he goes, oh, that's owned by the Catholic Church. I go, the Catholic Church owns this mansion, oceanfront? I go, why is no one there? He goes, well, about once a year, 2 nuns come and stay for the weekend. And we looked at each other and said, how rich is the Catholic Church? This whole show started, I didn't tell you, I told him, we were talking about Joel Osteen and the big mega church in Houston, and I said, why don't you Google his car? And it was this ridiculous Ferrari that looks like a rapper would drive, right? Joe was like, what?
That's where I started going down the slippery slope of what do mega pastors do with their tithes? Because I saw his car, and then I started seeing private jet, not Joel Osteen, but it almost seems like these pastors, they will literally trade private jets to each other like they're trading cards, like the mega pastors. It's so insane. Can we talk about that? Like what they do with their money?
Well, there's one that pops up is very famous. Kenneth Copeland. Have you heard of him? Big mega church pastor.
You know what day it is? No, it's one day closer to the resurrection. Yes! Hallelujah!
I've seen him and his wife, and they are like the face of the TV evangelism.
So now we see all of these devils, and we see them in their place. Political devils, wicked spirits in the heavenlies. This is the reason people run on one thing while they're at home. They go to Washington, they do something exactly opposite. Have no idea what kind of devils they're up against, and a lot of them don't know there are devils. If you said the word, they'd laugh at you.
Well, he gets cornered. This reporter, it's the funniest thing you've ever seen, Joe, and we've got a link to this. It's 12 minutes long. It is worth every second of it. Of any 12, I see someone tells me it's a 12-minute video. I don't want to watch it. I got about 2 minutes in me. This one's worth it. So this 30-something reporter, she, in her high heels, runs, and he's getting out of his Escalade in his big suit, fancy suit, with his security team around him. She corners him.
How are you, sir? We'd just like to ask you about why you don't want to fly commercial.
And starts yelling at him and asks about his private jet.
Why have you said that you won't fly commercial? You said that it's like getting into a tube with a bunch of demons.
And he gets so uncomfortable, Joe. You've seen the video, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to play clips of it. It's great.
Listen, I paid. You kind of caught me off guard here, okay?
But to his defense, he hung in there and started justifying having a private airplane. Now, this woman is a reporter, and she knows the Bible because both of her grandparents were pastors. So she's saying, how can you justify this? And he's talking down to her in a very sexist, condescending way, calling her sweetie, calling her baby.
Right.
Do you think that people that fly commercial are demons?
If you give me a chance to talk, sweetheart, I'll explain this to you. Give me a chance here, Inside Edition. Okay. I love your eyes.
And he finally kind of stumbles through it. It's really uncomfortable to watch him. He says, yeah, I do take my jet to my private. He said, but I've brought 120 million people to Christ. Without this airplane, I couldn't do it. So his whole sales thing at the end, his whole justification was he's so important in saving souls, and he wouldn't be able to save as many souls if he had to ride on a commercial plane.
Right. And then he calls, or like in a past sermon that she was quoting, he called people who are on commercial planes demons.
Right. And she kept throwing that in his face, like the riffraff. He goes, I can't, and this is what he said finally, because she kept pinning him down that he had said that. He said, I wasn't talking about people. I wasn't. Almost like a teenager who was, I didn't say that. I didn't do that. That's how he was doing. Yeah. And finally he said, well, think about it. I have to go give a sermon and save people's souls, and there's an alcoholic or a drinker. The demon is on that plane. I can't perform at this level. And then he tried to justify this, I mean, the guy's worth $1 billion or $500 million. It's even hard to say. He's got properties all over the world that he flies to. And he brags about the clothes he wears. He's a pretty flashy guy.
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, well, I have natural gas on my property. You didn't know about that, did you, babe?" And of course, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but who paid for the house? The church.
Right. It is funny you say that. We are going to get into how much the houses of pastors and preachers are also tax exempt and also paid for by the church. So like, no, the defense of my property is worth money and that's where I get it from, or I make this money by doing extracurricular things outside the church. It's complete nonsense. It's a tax loophole. So, okay, how about his defense? I actually wanted to get your opinion on that. There's a lot of these things where, like, most episodes, Todd asks a question and then I come back with, like, science or studies with an answer. This is the opposite. I am looking at science and studies and I'm coming back to Todd and being like, is this true? So his defense of the jet gets him to all these other souls. Do you think that's legit? Or do you think that, like, he could do the same thing on commercial? Could he just put in, like, earbuds and a face mask and do what the rest of us do and just do what companies do?
And then that was his big thing. He's been on 5 continents. To me, it looked very Rolling Stone Mick Jagger. I'm going around, and I think he's mistaking services. He's saying eye to eye, I save more people's lives. But we know that most of the churches, mega churches now, they're so big. Some of these churches are so big. 2,000 again is the small one. I mean, they get to 12, 20,000, 30,000 people. You're almost at a sporting event. You're watching them. You can't see the pastor. You're watching it on the big screen because to give you an example, Joel Osteen, where he has church services where the Houston Rockets used to play NBA basketball. That's how big some of these places are. When he goes on tour, he plays Yankee Stadium where the New York Yankees plays. He doesn't go to your local, So my point being, you don't really see them. You're watching them on a screen anyway. So this guy saying he flies to 5 continents, is going to Africa to save it. Yeah, no, he's there on vacation eating caviar is what I think.
He's not saving 100 million souls by going to 5 continents. He is performing in large venues to 120 million people.
And getting paid and getting compensated handsomely for it. Like any public speaker, he's getting paid to be there with the tithing and the
right. And there are just tiers and tiers of like a pyramid of dedicated people on that continent wherever he's going. He goes to Africa, there are pastors, preachers, deacons, and just a whole network of people who have set up everything for him before he arrives. Everybody in that stadium has been plugged in, as we put earlier.
Now, who's that money manager guy, the very conservative guy who's on the radio all the time?
Oh,
it's not Rush Limbaugh, the guy. He's still alive. What do you call him? Ramsey. Dave Ramsey. Okay, I got it.
Okay, Dave Ramsey.
You know who he is?
Vaguely rings a bell.
Well, there's a money manager guy, and he's very conservative. His name is Dave Ramsey. So when I was at the Christ Church of the Valley, when you're in the higher tithing, you get special benefits. Now, I found out that Dave Ramsey was coming, and I thought this is a big deal. He's a celebrity radio host. And they said, Todd, you can't tell anybody. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't? Why is this not advertised? They go, it's already sold out, and it's only to specific members of the church are invited to pay $500. So they're hiring these big mega church pastors to come to your church. You're going to pay to meet them like you would a president or a celebrity, and you're grateful that you were the one who won the lottery to be able to give money.
Holy shit!
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. They're keeping it a secret. They said it's sold out. The guys we're paying them $50,000 to be here for a few hours or whatever. And I'm like, how much money does this church have? I was just so impressed. I'm like, wow, you guys got money, man. Between the Camels and Dave Ramsey coming in and no one sits like under the table.
You mentioned world-renowned public speakers. That is exactly what we used to cover when we talked about like public speakers who would hold, camps and like coaching seminars and these very private, very prestige. Like they would go to their best sort of like supporters and the people they had coached who were CEOs and like magnates and things. And they would tell them, here's, I'm doing a private session this weekend. Tony Robbins kind of stuff where you go to a seminar for $1,000. That sounds so close to that.
It is. What was that? The message we did about the motivational speaker who killed all those people in the
Right, the steam tent in Arizona.
Yeah, and then all his people were all very professional. They were dentists and doctors and lawyers, and they go to every single one of his seminars. I mean, that was their vacation every year was going to spend $20,000 to be out in the woods with this guy.
Right. So what do they do with the money? Like, that's the question that reporter was implying with her talking about, do you need this private jet? And then he took it hunting, and he's taken it to like private vacations and stuff. Like, I know he said that he was using the money to reach 5 continents and 100 million people. But he, like many of these pastors who end up buying private jets, there are, like I said, there are TV pastors who famously have bought multiple private jets for fun and trade them among each other. And they use them very, very frequently for like just trips.
No, my very favorite thing he said with this interview, he got bum rushed by this young woman. He said, to justify the cost of the plane, he said the guy who gave it to him was such a good man. He gave him such a good deal.
Without the airplane that we have that I bought from Tyler Perry, and I didn't pay anywhere, and Tyler's one of the greatest guys. He made that airplane so cheap for me, I couldn't help but buy it.
He had to take it.
He couldn't say no. The jet was so cheap that it was impossible to say no. Literally, like a cheap, like your uncle selling your car is such a good deal.
Right.
That's how out of touch with reality he is. Now, I started looking at his houses. Now, his houses doesn't like he owns a couple houses in the neighborhood. He has mega mansions all over the world. They're so big you can't even. Usually, it's a helicopter picture. His, you have to go even further out, Joe. They're such. I mean, this is some real Saddam Hussein shit, dude.
Right.
These are palaces.
Hold on, let me find the. Oh God, where is it? I'm trying to find. Oh, here we go. Okay, so let's talk that real quick. When we talk about what megachurches do with their money, let's start with, how does Copeland live in a $7 million house? That is, by the way, that is what his main residence is. He has all these mansions you're talking about. His main house is a $7 million house. There is something in tax code called the Parsonage Allowance. The Parsonage Allowance is a sum of money awarded by the same governing board of a house of worship to its ministers to offset housing expenses. So to break that down, what it basically means for tax purposes, you are given an allowance by your church, and this allowance, the Parsonage Allowance, is tax-free. It's exempted from the recipient's gross income, and it is considered to be sort of like their hardship. Like they've sacrificed their life to, bring you the word of God. So we're not going to tax you on the house you get, and that money for the house is going to come from the church. If this was a small 50-person church in like old Ireland, and it's the preacher who's a hardworking Catholic that wanders, literally physically walks house to house and like comforts people and gives them the word of God, that is different. That is a true parsonage allowance. That is, they are being given a small amount of money to have a little hovel in Ireland so that they can continue their duties. What the parsonage allowance in the hands of our mega pastor becomes a $7 million allowance for a mansion and for private jets if he so chooses. And you and I have talked about the prosperity gospel, and it's the idea that like having wealth and flaunting it, like flaunting your $7 million house and your private jet, it doesn't deter people in mega churches. People in mega churches don't see that and say, oh my God, that's corruption. They say, oh my God, I want that. God has made their seed grow. I hope he makes mine too. Like it's seen as their reward for being very, very spiritual.
Well, you got to watch The Righteous Gemstones. It's Danny.
Oh, Danny McBride.
Yeah, Danny McBride, and he's a sarcastic self, and he is a mega church pastor's son. And it's a total spoof on mega churches and abundance and $1 million everything and Ferraris and the whole bit. But it's funny because there's so much truth to it, you know.
I had no idea what that show is about. I've heard the name of the show. That, well, one, the title now makes sense. Righteous Gemstones. That, okay. Yeah, I got to watch that. That sounds amazing. Now that I know
it's
all
all
the ins and
on
outs.
point. It's going to make a
Yeah.
lot of sense after this episode.
When we first started playing this episode, you asked me point blank, you said, what do mega churches give back and what do they spend their money on? The whole point of this very large ballooned episode was for me to try to answer that, and I failed utterly. I want you to know that.
Well, that you know what, you just stirred my memory here, but this is how this episode started. I was watching The Righteous Gemstones, and I'll give you, this is the scene. So the pastor, Danny McBride, was talking to his son, and his son wanted to go help kids in Africa. He was digging ditches for water, right? And Danny's like, hey, let's leave the philanthropy to the Catholics and the liberals. Let's just keep our money for us. And that's how I feel that big mega churches are. They keep all their money. They put on this big show to attract enough money. But, you know, the liberals and the Catholics, they do a lot of things in the community.
They could have, it's a funny joke, they could have replaced that phrase with, let's leave it to the local churches. Let's leave it to the small ones. The 50% of churches now, because remember, half of all churchgoers go to mega churches now. And what do they do with their money? Do they give back as much as small local churches? The problem is we legally don't know. We don't know because churches basically by mandate of the government or just by the history of the United States, they don't get audited. Like the government does not audit churches. So like there's only been a couple church audits in the last 10 years. What I could find on like leadnet.org is half or more goes to salary. So like a mega church draws in, several $100,000 in a sitting in a Sunday.
And they have staff. They have the full-time staff. There's full-time people. They have a lot of volunteers, but there are people that are full-time.
It looks like, from everything I could find, the structure is very much like a corporation. The half of everything that comes into a mega church goes to salary. The bulk of that goes to the head of the church. The bulk of that does go to Joel Osteen. It goes to, like the preacher is the public speaker.
The celebrity.
And then they're the celebrity.
They're the Jay-Z and the Beyonce. They are.
Right.
They're the talent.
Yeah. And then from that 50% whack of what the church gets, huge part of that goes to the speaker, and then it trickles to basically what looks like normal salaries from them down on. Human resources get paid roughly what human resources get paid in the non-church world. The guards get paid about the same. Of course, there's a little difference here and there depending on where you are. Some churches seem to take advantage of their employees. They pay them minimum or lower than what they would working other places, and the benefit is you're working for God. That's what
Joe. I got to stop you there because you're dead on. This is very similar to we did an episode about wage theft and Disneyland. They will really push the button, and I know a lot of people who have been pastors and haven't been able to, they're supportive pastors, not the main pastor, which makes a difference. They make barely above minimum wage, and they have a lot of responsibilities, right? And that's a tough job because you're juggling volunteers. Volunteers are hard to juggle because they get a sense of entitlement that they've been there for so long and they give so much and they help so much, and you need them, right?
Right.
So what happens is they get kind of angry with the church because they keep pushing it's a blessing that you even have this job. And there's so many people that want to do it, similar to Disneyland. There's so many people that want to, because it's exciting to them, and they want to help people. So they they take advantage of that and pay them, not even a living wage.
That's just all jobs after the 2008 recession. It's a blessing you have this job. You should be thanking God. Oh wait, this isn't a church. It's just a job.
I was listening to this sermon one day, and it was this African American pastor with this big, booming, deep voice, and this is about volunteerism at church. And he said, "You know what? I'm coming to church today and getting in my Cadillac, and I was thinking about coming and seeing the volunteers, and I'm sick of them. I'm sick of looking at them. I'm sick of these." And I'm like, what is he talking about?
Holy shit.
And then finally he goes, because it's always the same people.
There's the twist. Okay.
Yeah, and so what he's saying is, and he's right. It's the same people who give the most and give most of their time. And he's trying to recruit more of them.
And if they were in the LDS church, the way they'd recruit them is they'd just find people who are tithing low and then be like, hey, you owe us labor because you didn't pay us enough.
Now, the LDS church has got in some trouble recently because some accountants have left them, and they've been caught with their tithing money, their tax-free money. They've been bailing out legitimate businesses and rebranding them in their portfolio. Now, I also know some local smaller religions in the Northwest where they support local construction companies. They give them low-interest loans. So they dabble, and they support their members who, of course, support them back. So there's a lot of that goes on. Churches are very, very powerful, and they spread their money out in ways, their tax-free money out into legitimate businesses. They kind of jab in and out of them without paying taxes.
Well, it's funny to say that it is possible that the pastor Creflo Dollar wanting a private jet, and Mike Murdoch buying 2 jets, Kenneth Copeland flying multiple jets, Jesse Duplantis he has a Falcon 7X that has the phrase on the side, "It's not about possessions, it's about priorities." These might be the smart pastors, like the ones who are buying private jets and $7 million mansions. They are not doing what the LDS church might get in trouble for. They're not doing what local Northwest churches might get in trouble for. It's when they start dabbling in local businesses without paying taxes, when they start putting money into political campaigns, even though they're not supposed to be political, that gets shady. That's where we start hitting gray area. And like I said, the IRS, almost by a rule, never audits churches, even mega churches. But eventually,
they're afraid of religions. Yeah, because when they went after Scientology for taxes, that got ugly. Scientology went back after them because it and said they were going to sue the individual IRS agents, and then they got scared.
Right.
I mean, why would they be afraid of the churches if they're not doing the money what they're supposed to be doing, right?
Right. Well, there are mega churches that so first off, because we don't audit them, because they don't disclose it, churches by a rule, they themselves do not disclose how much they give to charity unless it is like a PR stunt for their congregant. Oftentimes what happens is a mega church, like you said, will charity signal. They're not virtue signaling, they're charity signaling. They will say, with us, all of us together, we raised $100,000 to save this person's house, this small business. We sent, 50 people to Africa to build habitats for humanity, whatever they're doing. But it is such a small drop in the bucket. Most churches choose not to disclose all of their salaries, but 2, their charities. I found a couple of examples of churches that did disclose their charities. Saddleback Church in California, I think the reason why they're willing to disclose their charities is because they do so damn much. I looked into them. I've been looking into churches trying to find out what they do. Joel Osteen's church, didn't find much. They report to their own church during sermons their charities, but they don't report much as far as transparency online and through taxes and stuff. Saddleback in California, they have their Peace Plan, which provides clean water, healthcare, and education and economic outreach globally. They dabble in mental health issues. They dabble in AIDS. They dabble in local outreach. They are, to my sort of like cursory research and AI assisted research, they are doing it right. They are open and clear with their charities.
Are they open with the percentage they're giving though? Because that's the thing.
Depends on the year.
Yeah, they give, like, again, they'll do an outreach thing for, to go travel, some missionary work. They'll make videos of it. It's almost like a promotional tour, to get more money. It's just so kind of aimed at getting more money. It's a little bit insulting at times.
That the phrase you just used, that perfectly encapsulates how these mega churches give back. Promotional tour. They will do a PR tour. They will do a charity signaling. But by and large, from what they disclose, that's really all you need to know is find out, if you can, how much the church brings in, how much its portfolio is worth. Like we said, the LDS business-like stock portfolio, like the portfolio they've built in the closet, it's worth over $100 billion. Just do the math and compare when they say we raise $50,000 for, habitats or charity or whatever. Just compare that to what everybody gives that week. It is such a fractional drop in the bucket. It might be shocking. The amount they are paying for private jets oftentimes are way more than what the charity that they just announced is
right.
bringing in.
So the carpet in their house costs more than the charity they gave to last year. Yeah.
Right. But it sounds good because it's a big number to us, small time folk. Can we talk a little bit about like evangelists getting into property and politics? Because we're starting to flirt with the line that they are flirting with, which is, how much can we get away with investment? How much can we get away with, starting to pick sides politically?
Yeah, one of my favorite is, Jim Bakker was a very famous televangelist, and he got himself in a lot of trouble for infidelities and spending money the wrong. He was convicted of fraud in 1989, but he got out, and he's still a Christian celebrity. So there's Branson, Missouri. Do you know where that out's in the middle of the Ozark Mountains? Joe, have you ever been to Branson?
Never been.
It's kind of like a poor person's Nashville kind of retirement area. Well, they have a Christian retreat designed for the faithful. That was their marketing thing. And so they got Bakker because he just got out of prison, so he's cheap, right? So, but he's still a celebrity, and he's praying that only the righteous, the people closest to God, can come live here, and that they're going to pray that their house sells wherever they are so they can live here with these other. And they're making ridiculous claims like saying NASA has determined that this is the safest place on earth, and then saying that when there's a rapture, when it's the end of the world, this place is going to be the only place that's safe. Branson, Missouri.
Okay, so you and we should pack our bags because, like, I'm a fallout shelter kind of guy. So, like,
isn't it scary that people are falling for this in droves?
So you're saying I shouldn't pack my bags?
Yeah, these people have houses that these are not dumb people. These are people who own houses outright wherever they live, and they're blindly following a pastor who has a record of fraud. It's concerning. Like, you could see how little old ladies could give their whole life savings to a pastor, and not to help people or move people towards Christ, but just to pay for their fuel for one day of a jet ride to their mansion.
Right. So that's okay. That is actually, all of my glib jokes aside, that is actually the danger here, is he is reaching out to people who are in his demographic, which means they're probably retired. They probably own their home outright. They probably don't need to move across the country toward where the rapture fallout bunkers in the Ozarks are. What was he doing this for? Like, what was his motivation?
Commissions to sell timeshares, or not timeshares, to sign condos. Yeah, it's not complicated.
USA Today reported on that he owned some of the estates there. So, like,
so he was part of the investment group.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about politics. First, I want to ask it as a question because, again, you have a lot more experience in this than I do. How many megachurch pastors have you encountered who talk politics, who will actually, if there's a presidential debate coming up or there's an election coming up, how many of them will actually go out on stage and say, if you're a real Christian, you'll vote this way?
I've never heard them directly say it the ones, but what we do have is we have they'll support different ones in different ways. They'll have them at some events.
Okay.
And every church kind of has it's either blue or red, right? They kind of have their own. They can't be both. So the more liberal, the more older conservative churches are usually red, and then the newer mega church. It's a mix though. It's really a mix. They have to be careful because they don't want to lose half of their congregation.
Right. Well,
I think they lean towards red in values, but then they don't. So they'll invite someone there as a guest, but they won't say you need to vote. But I have seen it on TV with a big megachurch that, especially in the southeast part of this country, I've seen it on TV where they're like, you have to. Like, if you're a Christian, you'll vote this way. I mean, they're saying that.
Okay, so that kind of leads me to an interesting question. Why can't they be both? Like, it would, if I am sort of like really, really, really political and I go to church for a pretty specific message, I can see why pissing me off means you would piss off my money. Like, I would walk away with it. But if church is tax exempt and they're being tax exempt because they're providing faith to America, isn't that kind of like a utility like water or like, air? Like, isn't that something where if we are tax exempting it, it should be available to everybody?
You'd think.
The
big church, the big political thing too was the mask or not mask, or to vaccinate or not.
Right.
Churches, it was really hard because they were going to lose a lot of members by saying we want you vaccinated, and then they were making, health calls too. I mean, that spiritual advisors are people hold them in high esteem, and they always have. It's not a new thing, right?
Right.
But you think over time it would have washed off, but still to this day, it might not be as powerful as it used to be. But yeah.
Well, there are so many of these mega church pastors who are risking the absolute shit out of their tax exemption, and they're not treating faith like it is water. They are treating it like it's a message they can withhold. For example, we're talking about Baker. He told his followers, only saved people can love Trump. That's a quote. And he had a guest on his show that said impeachment would lead to civil war. And I think that's when he had Rick Joyner on his show. Like, he chose lines so hard. It wasn't even like he was dog whistling or like quietly saying, hey, 60% of my congregation is, deep red, conservative, and we hold your values up. We agree with it. It's a lot of these are values that our book holds up. He just straight up chose a candidate, not a party. He chose a candidate and said only saved people can love this person.
Oh boy.
And there's absolutely versions of this on both sides. The liberal version of this was back when Ed Bacon in California, he got into a dispute with the IRS because he put out an anti-war sermon, and it almost cost the congregation its tax exemption. So like, it happens on both sides. I think it's because we're getting more polarized as a nation, but it's still insane to me that like you would just get rid of your tax exemption, or that you would be willing to risk it because you think that your message should only go to one side or the other.
What I think this is that the lobbyists, there's so much votes in there that they're getting compensated other ways.
Oh,
and the only thing that makes sense. That's the only, right? Does that make sense? And then also that getting their own political interest in, if they're going to run for office, then that has value, because why else would they do it?
So if I'm like a hardline like Democrat, and I am like, I'm so into voting for like Hillary Clinton, I take my money to a church locally and I say, hey, could you give a anti-war sermon? Here's a bunch of money to your congregation. Like I am the biggest donor that week. And then they slip in a little bit into their speech. because that's so much money.
And they're just they have so much influence. They do just more than they should. I put it that way.
I probably sound like the most naive person on earth right now.
I was going to
I'm
say,
so
yeah,
used to hearing lobbyists be political. Like I'm used to hearing, here's Dunkin' Donuts giving $100,000 to the Republican Party because they know it will have sway. I'm not used to lobbyists going to religious leaders and doing the same thing. Of course, that has to exist.
You remember during when COVID started and the riots started and President Trump, he gassed a bunch of people in the street so he could go take a picture at a church with a Bible. It was just really weird.
Yeah.
It was just a promo shot. So this part of the country, we don't realize how powerful. And you're in Texas, they have a lot. Each one of those mega pastors has got thousands of people wrapped around their finger, and there's a lot of them.
That has been, by the way, I'll take a brief personal aside here. I am so used to my family is traditionally Irish Catholic. They came from a dull, gray, rainy place and then moved to the Pacific Northwest, a dull, gray, rainy place. And church has always been quiet, sort of Catholic mass kind of stuff. Coming to the South where it is church is celebrated and it's sunny all the time and everybody has a way different emotional attitude about it. It's crazy.
It's a true Bible Belt. You're tripping over churches down there too, I'm sure.
Every 5 feet. Yeah. They overlap like a Venn diagram. At first I thought it was competing Starbucks, and then I found out that they have enough congregation to actually not have to compete. But okay, so have you heard about the very few mega churches who have actually dissolved their own tax exempt status because they want to get political?
No, I have not.
Okay, so there's this guy, Greg Locke, who has been embroiled in other scandals, and he got very, very, very red state. I'll declare myself again. I am a registered independent. I don't have a political party. I think it's dumb getting into party fights and not going supporting a person like their demagogue instead of an issue. I think is foolhardy. But some people decide that supporting a candidate is godly. Literally, that's the kind of rhetoric they use. Greg Locke is one of those people. He got so into supporting the Republican Party, he openly came out and dissolved his, it's the 501c3 tax-exempt status. He put it out on his Twitter. He said, our message is going to be spread, status be damned. And I don't know if he actually did it again because we're not transparent about what churches make or what their statuses are or anything like that. But he supposedly dissolved his status. He said, I can now spread this message because I am dissolving my tax exemption status. At that point, if you're not legally recognized as a church, if you don't have the tax exemption and you are no longer kind of going along with that, if you are no longer in the eyes of the law a church, at that point you're just a political messaging service with benefits. Greg Locke, if he does not have the legal status as a church, to me, that just means he is a highly religious political system or political speaker. By the way, Greg Locke, he runs Greg Locke of Global Vision Bible Church in Mount Juliet. He goes after Kenneth Copeland. So our man of the cloth and the jumbo jet or the private jet, Kenneth Copeland, who was calling people on public who flew commercial jets, called them demons. Ironically enough, Greg Locke called Kenneth Copeland a demon. He called him
Thou shalt not judge.
Right.
The rich and the richer, right? Judging
right,
each
exactly.
other. Yeah, but my jet's 3 years old and yours are brand new.
Right. This guy that dissolved his own church 501c status is calling the guy with the private jet demon, a Freemason. I just want to read this quote because it's hilarious to me. He said, quote, But you know when they won't interview me? Because I called out Kenneth Copeland. Kenneth Copeland is a heretic, you hear me? Kenneth Copeland is the #1 Christian heretic in America. He wouldn't know the Bible if it bit him on the butt in the middle of the road. Kenneth Copeland is a demon and he knows it. It just goes on and on. Like
Isn't that some? That's gonna be in our show notes. But I think it's the whole point. He wouldn't know the Bible if it bit him in the ass. Kind of.
right.
Isn't that a funny thing to say? He doesn't. This guy doesn't know the Bible.
Ironically, the guy claiming that being politically active is godly, this guy is saying somebody else wouldn't know the Bible if it bit him on the butt. And he even has a quote here about Kenneth Copeland. He says, quote, "He's got a lot, and he got it off the naive Christians that ought to have tithed to the local church and quit sending him money." A TV pastor is calling out another TV pastor and saying those people should have tithed to a local church.
Oh my goodness.
So
it's so funny. We did a kind of, I guess you would say, we've already done an anti-mega church episode, and we focused on Mars Church. Do you remember that pastor's name? Mark
Hill?
It was Mars Hill was the church.
Mars Hill. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Mark Driscoll.
Mark Driscoll. This guy was such a slime ball that after we did the episode, I was kind of looking over my shoulder. I was afraid this guy might hit me over the head with a pipe. So some of these guys have got some serious street cred. You're like, oh, don't let that smile in those suits fool you.
Oh yeah, they're tough guys.
I know Joel Osteen's on steroids. I saw him at the beach once. He's just ripped. And he's driving a Ferrari. The guy,
It reminds me of like I'm currently in the middle of writing. We're working on a book for the podcast that kind of sums up basically everything we've learned about self-awareness. I'm rereading parts of the Lehman Brothers and like how their CEOs were like their managerial staff was like they were on coke, they had addictions, they made threats to each other, they talked about eating hearts. It sounds so similar, like reading about how these mega church pastors conduct themselves. It is mirror to the CEOs of like these Wall Street brokerages that like went bust because they were all just sort of like riding the high and literally addicted to their jobs.
Well, I have had to. I have to say, we talked about. I have been, not told to vote, but I have been told to tithe. I forgot about this. It was a church up in Seattle. It was a big mega church, and it was the wife of the pastor would always do it. And this was during 2008 when there was the mortgage crisis. And she actually said, maybe if you tithed more, you wouldn't be losing your job or your house. just saying, in a kind of, can you believe that? To thousands of people who are having financial hardships because the church, and you can tell when the church is having hardships too, because there starts to be more fundraisers and more pressure to give. More, I wouldn't say pressure to give, more opportunities to give.
Right. And the message, of course, is going to be, if whatever money you put in, it will come back to you. So if you are desperate and your mortgage is up and your kids are going to fall out of school if you don't get that money, then the pressure becomes plant that seed. Whatever money you have left over, put it into the church and God will provide the rest.
Don't struggle with your rent. Relax. I have a covenant with God.
Speaking of God providing the rest, churches themselves don't generally rely on God to provide. They rely on the IRS tax code. Can we talk about the 501c3? Because I've referenced it so many times already.
Please.
Okay. So here is why. If you're out there and you belong to a megachurch and you're mentally defending your pastor for saying political messaging, saying that, what's wrong with it if, 85% of my church is Democrat or 85% of my church is Republican. They're speaking to their congregation about the values that they need to hear. What's so wrong with that? Well, the part that's wrong is that, the U.S. basically lets them go tax-free. And everybody who runs a business, small or large, knows your business will die on taxes. Your business is, will die or thrive in the margins, and taxes are the margin.
10% is, that's everything. That's in or out of business. Absolutely.
Right. That's why so many billionaires do everything they absolutely can to avoid paying taxes and to get taxes low for whatever business they start. The tax code 501c3. I'm just going to read it, just quote it so that you know what it says. Organizations are absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf or in opposition to any candidate for public office. Contributions to political campaign funds or public statements violate the prohibition against political campaign activity. Violating this prohibition may result in denial or revocation of the tax-exempt status and the imposition of certain excise taxes. So, just that is the clearest language possible. You're not only not supposed to say who you support, you're not supposed to say what laws you necessarily support. You're not supposed to say, like you're never supposed to contribute any church money or your own money as a church leader to a campaign, even though so many people do now.
It's safe to say that they've bent that rule, and in most parts of the country they've broken it.
Yeah, and I think that is why.
And I think that's not just the Southeast. I can see in New York City or Boston, I can see the same thing. The church's influence on politics is, well, the Catholic Church has had
right
for years all over the world. The world politics.
Yeah, it's funny me reading this and then having my family come from the Catholic Church traditionally, because that's like the most political you could ever get for a church.
And powerful. They're
they
not just political. They're not just telling you what they think. They're powerful. They're
go back to like Tudor England, where the Catholic Church is calling every shot possible.
Yeah. I mean, politicians kiss their rings.
Well, we are supposedly living in a world where politicians are not saviors. Whether it's Trump or Biden, they are not your savior. You will not get raptured because you support one over the other. That's not true. I don't care what Jim Bakker says. That's not the case. They are public servants. And there's a podcaster, Dan Carlin. He says that it doesn't matter how high up the chain they are. A local politician, you can always say, "Get me a glass of water," and because they're a public servant, they should go get it for you. If we obey tax-exempt status, if we, like I asked you earlier, should faith be a public good like water? Should it be something where, it's available to everybody? If you are a pastor, you should be doling it out to everybody. We've dropped so many names of politicians and stuff. I kind of want to circle back to the original question. If we talk 10% of your income and we take into account how much mega churches spend on private jets, how much they do engage in political rhetoric, how much they spend, or the church allots them with the church allowance in housing, everything like that. The experience with the church involved. You said without the church, it's worth about $60 a week to you, going to basically a weekend concert every week and getting jazzed up. Is it still worth 10% of your income knowing all of this stuff?
To me, it is not. And I think a lot of my friends who are the high earners who believe in 10%, they believe in it for prosperity. I just don't share that value or that faith. To me, I'm willing to give as much as I do go into the movies, and I'm willing to give a lot of my time. But for giving a lot of my time, I'm connecting with people who have a certain value set, people who I think not as much just value set, but are on their best behavior. Because you're not in a bar and you're not in a wherever, at a sports game or at a concert.
I think that is a sentiment I can get behind. And we started this podcast out by saying that there's actually a lot of value to going to, finding a church where you can socially plug in, finding a church that has a message that is overall positive. Like there are a lot of positives that come with this. And you can pick a Joel Osteen. You can totally choose a mega church that is going to spend your money on a private jet. But you should go into it knowing